Nobody opens a door during a blizzard. Not for a stranger. Not for a sound you can't explain. You keep that door shut, and you survive. But sometimes survival ain't the same thing as living, and that's a truth most folks learn too late. Wind came first. Not the kind that whistles through cracks or rattles shutters, the kind that erases the world. 40 miles an hour across open Montana flats, driving snow sideways until there was no sky, no ground, no horizon, just white, just cold, -20 and dropping. And the blizzard was 3 days deep with no sign of quitting. Elias Crane dragged a sled of split pine through drifts that reached his chest. 37 years old and built like a fence post, narrow, weathered, hard to knock down. His beard had frozen stiff, his eyelashes crusted shut twice on the quarter-mile walk from the woodpile. He didn't hurry. A man alone in weather like this either moves steady or dies stupid. His cabin appeared through the white, one window, dark. He'd stopped lighting the lamp in the evenings a year ago. Didn't see the point. Inside, 2 boys, Jesse, 11, sitting upright against the wall with a blanket around his shoulders, watching the door with eyes no child should own. Samuel, 5, asleep on the straw mattress, fingers curled around a small carved bird, a meadowlark, sanded so smooth the grain caught lamplight like water, made by hands that would never carve again. 3 plates on the shelf, 1 pot on the stove, no mirror, no photograph, no curtains on the window, a door at the far end of the cabin, boarded shut with 8 planks nailed crooked and hard. The cabin was a machine for not dying, and Elias kept it running. He stacked the wood without speaking. Jesse watched without speaking. Silence and function, that was all they had left. Now, you have to understand something about a man who's been quiet that long. It ain't that he's got nothing to say. It's that he said the one thing that mattered. We'll be fine out here. Ruth, I promise. And the world made him a liar. After that, words felt counterfeit, no good to anyone. Elias pulled his coat tight and stepped back into the blizzard for one more load. His boot hit something soft. He looked down. A bare foot, small, pale blue, jutting from the drift at an angle that stopped his heart. He dropped to his knees and dug with both hands. A girl, 6, maybe 7, face down in the snow. No shoes, lips the color of a bruise, frost in her hair like tiny white stars. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck and held his breath until he found the pulse. Thin as thread. But there, he didn't think. He lifted her 40 pounds of ice and shallow breath and carried her inside, kicked the door shut, laid her by the stove on the one good blanket he owned. Jesse was on his feet. "Pa, who is that?" Elias didn't answer. He was pulling frozen stockings from the girl's feet, rubbing her toes between his palms, working blood back into skin that had gone waxy and still. The girl's eyes opened. She screamed. Not a child's cry. A sound ripped from somewhere deep and animal, raw as bone scraping stone. She screamed for her mother, over and over. "Mama! Mama!" She thrashed against Elias's hands, kicked, clawed at air that wasn't giving her what she wanted. Jesse grabbed Samuel, pulled him behind his body like a shield. Samuel blinked awake, confused, clutching the carved bird tighter. That cabin hadn't heard a voice louder than a whisper in 2 years. The sound filled every corner and had nowhere to go. Elias held the girl at arm's length. His hands knew what to do with firewood and fence wire and a rifle that needed cleaning. They did not know what to do with this, a child who wasn't his. Screaming for a person who wasn't here, her body rigid with a terror he couldn't reach. Samuel solved it. The boy walked straight past his brother's outstretched arm, crossed the floor in bare feet, and held out the carved bird. Didn't say a word, just stood there, 5 years old, with sleep still in his eyes, offering the only precious thing he owned to a stranger who was trying to scream the walls down. The girl stopped. She stared at the bird. Her fingers, still blue at the tips, reached out and closed around it. She turned it over, ran her thumb across the smooth belly of the meadowlark. Silence. Elias watched his youngest son do in 3 seconds what he could not have done in an hour. His jaw tightened. He pressed down whatever was rising in his chest and turned back to practical things, stacking wood, checking the stove draft, anything with his hands. "She's froze up bad," Jesse said from behind Samuel. "Her feet ain't right. I know it. Where'd she come from? Don't know. She gonna die. Not tonight." The hour that followed was the longest Elias had spent inside his own cabin in 2 years. The girl sat wrapped in his blanket, rocking slightly, clutching the wooden bird against her sternum. Her crying had stopped, but her lips moved without sound, shaping the same word over and over, like a prayer she couldn't finish. Then, so quiet, he almost missed it. "Mama's comin'. She said she'd come." Elias figured it for fever, delirium. No one was coming through that blizzard alive, not on foot, not without a horse, not through drifts that swallowed fence posts whole. The knock came anyway. 3 hits against the door, weak, barely louder than the wind. Elias opened it. A woman stood in the storm, late 20s, tall, but bent at the waist like she was holding herself together through pure decision. Frostbitten hands, the fingertips black, the knuckles split and bleeding into the snow. Cracked lips, eyes that had stopped asking for help somewhere around mile 6 and were now just delivering facts. She saw the girl wrapped in the blanket. Her whole body softened for 1 second, just one, and then tightened again. She looked at Elias. Her left hand was pressed flat against her own chest, holding her coat shut. Her right hand reached out and touched the girl's head, gently, like confirming she was real. "Take her," the woman said. Her voice was barely a voice. Gravel and wind and something underneath that sounded like a door closing forever. "She's my heart. Can you take my heart?" Elias stepped back, not from her, from the size of what she was asking. Her knees buckled. He caught her. His arms moved before his mind could build a wall against it. And for the first time in 2 years, Elias Crane held another adult. She weighed nothing. She weighed everything. Jesse appeared in the doorway behind him. "Pa." His voice had gone flat and old. "She's bleedin'." The woman's coat had fallen open, underneath a gash across her ribs, deep, crusted with dried blood, gone black at the edges. She'd been walking through a blizzard with her coat pressed shut over it, holding her insides together with one hand and her daughter's future in the other. Nora Drennan heard everything through water. The man's voice low, steady, giving orders to the older boy. Hot water, clean cloth, the brown soap, not the white. Hands on her side, peeling fabric from the wound where blood had glued cotton to skin. She flinched. The hands paused, then continued, gentler. She and Lily had been 4 days from her sister's homestead when the blizzard hit. The horse went down first, just folded its legs, and lay in the snow like it was tired of the whole arrangement. Nora carried Lily on her back for 6 miles. Then the creek. She fell through the ice, and the gash opened on a rock she never saw. And the cold was so sharp she didn't feel the cut for an hour. Just wetness. Just heat where heat shouldn't be. She sent Lily ahead toward a light she thought she saw through the snow. "Run to that light, baby. Mama's right behind you." She wasn't right behind. She was on her knees in a drift, pressing her coat against a wound that wouldn't quit, making the kind of math no mother should ever have to do. "Take her. She's my heart." That wasn't poetry. That was a woman who believed she was dying, standing at a stranger's door, asking him to raise her daughter because it was the only thing she had left worth giving. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Elias clean the wound. His hands knew the work he'd done this before, but every time his skin touched hers, a tremor went through his fingers like he was handling something that might shatter. The cabin told her what he wouldn't. No mirror, no photograph, no softness anywhere, no curtains, no color, no evidence that a woman had ever lived here except the boarded door at the far end, 8 planks, nailed hard, a room nobody was allowed to see. She'd been doing the same thing, not with boards and nails, with miles, walking away from every place that held a memory until there was nowhere left to walk. "Your girl's name?" he asked. First question in an hour. "Lily. She ain't lost no toes. Got to her in time." "Thank you." He didn't answer, just wrung the cloth out and pressed it to her side. His jaw was set so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard. Lily sat in the corner, holding the carved bird. The older boy watching her from across the room like a hawk who hadn't decided if this mouse was a threat or just passing through. The little one, Samuel, she'd heard the older boy call him, was asleep again, with his thumb near his mouth. Nora's fever spiked. The room tilted. She reached for the edge of the bed, his bed, the only one, and gripped until her knuckles whitened. The last thing she felt before the dark took her was the blanket being pulled up to her chin. His hands were still shaking. In her coat pocket, pressed against her thigh, a brass button with a small anchor stamped into the metal. Her husband's, sewn onto this coat the week before typhoid took him. She'd carried it 1,100 miles. It was the only thing she owned that still meant something. By the third morning, with 5 people in a cabin built for 3, Elias had rearranged the furniture twice and still couldn't find enough distance. Nora's fever held at 103. He cleaned the wound twice daily, dawn and dusk. Silent, efficient, eyes on the gash and nowhere else. She watched him through the fever. He could feel that gaze tracking him around the room the way you feel heat from a stove you aren't facing. Jesse had drawn his line. She ain't our concern. Pa, she's in our house. That don't make her our concern. Reckon it does. Jesse turned away. The boy had his mother's stubbornness and his father's jaw. And when both set at the same time, there was no moving him. Elias understood. The last woman in this cabin had died. Jesse wasn't about to let another one in just to watch it happen again. But Samuel and Lily had built their own country, and they didn't care about borders. The boy showed the girl every corner of the cabin, the loose board where he kept interesting rocks, the spot by the stove where the cat used to sleep before it wandered off last spring, the meadowlark's favorite perch on the windowsill where morning light came through. Lily showed Samuel the brass button. He held it up to the lamp and turned it slowly, studying the tiny anchor. My pa had this on his coat, Lily said, before he went to heaven. Samuel considered this with the full gravity of a 5-year-old confronting theology. My ma made the bird before she went to heaven too. They sat together after that, cross-legged on the floor, each holding the other's dead parent in their small hands, trading grief like children, trade marbles easily without ceremony, because they hadn't yet learned that sorrow is supposed to be carried alone. Elias's throat closed. He turned to the shelf. 3 plates. He'd been pulling down 3 for 2 years. His hand went in and came out with 4. It stopped, hovered. 3 heartbeats, he counted them in his chest. Then the 5th plate came down. He set 5 on the table. Jesse stared. Pa. No answer. Elias served the oats and ate standing at the counter, same as always. The extra plate sat there, and he told himself it was practical, just practical. A body needs something to eat from. That night, after the children slept, he sat on the floor beside the bed where Nora lay. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the front door, where the blizzard pressed and howled and wanted in, guarding. She opened her eyes and saw him there. She closed them again and let him believe she was sleeping. Nora's fever broke on the 5th morning like a fist unclenching sudden, total, leaving her wrung out and blinking at a cabin that had rearranged itself while she slept. She found Lily curled between Jesse and Samuel on the straw mattress. Jesse's arm lay draped across both smaller children, protective. His face soft in sleep, in a way it never was when he was awake. The boy who'd called her the woman 3 days ago was holding her daughter like breathing required it. Nora stood. The wound pulled. She made it to the basin and gripped the edge until the room settled. You ought to be lying down. Elias, at the door with firewood. I ought to be useful. He set the wood by the stove, said nothing. But he didn't tell her to go back to bed, and she understood that silence was the only language of respect this man still spoke. She washed the dishes. Elias came to the basin for water. Their hands met on the same tin plate, his rough, scarred across the knuckles from work that never ended. Hers swollen from frostbite, the fingertips still peeling. He pulled back like he'd touched a branding iron. She didn't. She left her hand where it was. Steady. Present. Not reaching for him. Not pulling away. Just there. The way a lamp is there, not demanding you look at it, but making it possible to see. He walked out into the storm. Through the frosted window, she watched him stand in the blizzard with his arms at his sides, face tilted to the sky, letting the wind hit him full. A man using winter to feel something that wasn't grief. Jesse found her at the stove that evening. The boy leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, a miniature of his father. All boundary and silence. That bird Samuel gave your girl, my ma made it. I know. He didn't give it, though. He lent it. Jesse frowned. What's the difference? Lendin means he wants it back. Means he's expecting her to still be here to return it. The boy opened his mouth, closed it, walked away, but slower than he'd come. That night, Nora found the carved bird on the shelf by the lamp. She picked it up and turned it over. On the bottom, scratched in tiny careful letters, C. Ruth Crane. This boy, this 5-year-old, who couldn't yet write his own name, had been lending his dead mother's last creation to a girl he'd known for 5 days. And the trust in that act pressed against Nora's chest until she had to set the bird down and breathe through it. She placed it back exactly where it was. She took the brass button from her pocket Lily had given it back that morning. Said she didn't need it because Samuel's rocks were better company, and set it on the shelf beside the bird. 2 small things. 2 gone parents. Side by side in the lamplight like they'd been there all along. The cough started at sundown on the 7th day. Samuel had been fine at supper, quiet, eating his oats, making the meadowlark walk along Lily's arm while she giggled. By dark, he was wheezing. By midnight, every breath came with a sound like someone tearing paper, slowly, carefully, 1 strip at a time. Elias boiled water, held the pot beside Samuel's face, and let the steam rise into lungs that sounded like they were filling with sand. He'd done this once before Ruth had shown him, back when Jesse was 3 and caught the croup so bad his lips went blue. Ruth had been calm. Ruth had sung. Elias had neither calm nor song, so he held the pot steady and did not move. Jesse appeared at Samuel's other side. Hadn't been asked. Hadn't been told. Just materialized there, 11 years old with his jaw set and his hands in fists, standing guard over his brother, the way he'd been standing guard over everything since the day they put his mother in the ground behind the cabin where the snow was too deep now to see the cross. Lily crawled across the floor and climbed into Jesse's lap. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Neither of them spoke. He shifted his arms to make room. And something in the geometry of the cabin changed a wall that had been standing since the moment Nora knocked on the door quietly, silently. Came down. Nora sat behind Elias, not beside him, behind, close enough that the heat of her body reached the back of his neck. She didn't touch him, didn't speak, just sat. Hours moved like cold honey dripping from a tilted jar. At 1 a.m, Samuel's fever spiked. 104. His body burned and shivered at the same time, his small frame rigid, his eyes rolling back until only white showed. Elias's hands shook so badly the pot rattled against the stove grate. Steady, one word, Nora's voice, from behind him. He steadied. At 3, something shifted. The wheeze thinned. Samuel's breathing smoothed into a rhythm that sounded like sleep instead of drowning. His skin cooled under Elias's palm. The color came back to his lips in slow degrees, like dawn arriving. Nora leaned forward, her mouth near his ear. "He's gonna be fine." Elias's chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders moved. Once, a single tremor that passed through him the way a crack passes through ice, fast. Silent. Total. Then he straightened, set his jaw, pressed it back into the place where he kept everything. But Nora saw, and Jesse, across the room with Lily asleep against his chest, saw it too. His father, the man who hadn't bent, hadn't broken, hadn't made a sound that wasn't practical since the morning he boarded up that room, had cracked. The boy's face changed. Something in his eyes that had been locked shut for 2 years opened a 1/4 inch. Dawn crept through the window. Samuel slept. Lily slept. Jesse slept sitting up, his arm around the girl, his chin on his chest. Elias and Nora sat awake in silence. The fire popped, the wind pushed. Inside, everyone breathed. On the 8th morning, the wind changed direction, not stopped, shifted. The howling dropped an octave, then another, until it was more moan than scream. Elias stood outside and smelled it. The blizzard was thinning. A day, maybe 2, and the sky would open. The trails would clear. The world would come back. And with it, every choice he'd been putting off. He went to the boarded room, Ruth's room, the room where she'd labored for 11 hours and then stopped breathing, while Elias knelt on the floor beside her and begged God and cursed God and watched the light leave her eyes while a newborn screamed in the next room, and a 3-year-old stood in the corner not understanding why his mother wouldn't get up. The nearest doctor was 40 miles southeast. Might as well have been the moon. He'd nailed it shut the next morning. 8 boards. Jesse had watched him do it and never once asked why. Elias gripped the claw end of the hammer and pulled the first board free. The nails screamed coming out. Jesse appeared at the end of the hallway. His face went white. "What are you doing? Open in this room. For who?" Elias pulled the second board. Didn't answer. "You're fixing Mama's room." Jesse's voice was shaking, not anger. Something under anger. Something with teeth. "For that woman. For her." Elias set the hammer down. He turned to face his son. The boy stood with his fists balled and his chin trembling, and his eyes full of something that had been building since a 6-year-old girl crawled into his lap during a vigil and he didn't push her away. If she stays, Jesse's voice cracked down the middle. If she stays and something happens, if she dies too, then what do we do? Pa. Then what? Elias knelt, eye level. He didn't reach for the boy. Not yet. I boarded up that room because I figured if I couldn't see it, it wouldn't hurt. He paused. Let the quiet hold. It still hurt, Jesse, every single day. The boy broke. The tears came silent first, then with sound ugly, gulping sobs that an 11-year-old had been storing in his chest for 2 years because his father never cried, and someone in this house had to be the strong one. Elias pulled him in, held him. Jesse's fists beat against his father's chest twice hard, furious. Grieving then opened, then gripped his shirt and held on like the floor had dropped away. They stayed like that, father and son on the floor of a hallway, in front of a door that had been shut since the worst morning of their lives, letting the ghosts out. In the main room, Nora heard the hammering stop, heard the crying. She didn't move. Some doors you don't walk through uninvited. She went to her travel bag and pulled out the one thing she'd carried 1,100 miles, blue calico with tiny yellow flowers, a curtain from the window where her husband used to sit in the mornings before the typhoid took him. She'd kept it because the fabric still smelled like coffee and pipe smoke and a life that ended too soon. She walked to the open room, laid the folded fabric on the threshold, went back to the stove, put the kettle on, said nothing. Elias found it when he stood up, blue calico on bare wood. He picked it up and held it against his chest with both hands, and he understood what she was saying without her having said a word. The 10th morning broke blue, first sun in 11 days. The sky opened like a breath released, and the snow glittered so hard it hurt to look it straight. The blizzard was done. Nora packed. There wasn't much. The travel bag, Lily's spare stockings, the coat with one brass button missing the 5th one, the one with the anchor, hanging on a string around her daughter's neck and sitting on a shelf next to a carved bird in a cabin that wasn't hers. She buttoned the remaining 4 and told Elias she'd head east, her sister's place, 12 miles. She could make it by dark if the drifts weren't too deep. I'll wrap some food for the walk, he said. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't expect him to. This was a man who set 5 plates on a table instead of saying, "You matter." A man who opened a room he'd nailed shut instead of saying, "I'm ready." Asking out loud was a language he'd forgotten, or maybe never learned. She walked to the door. Her hand found the handle. "I don't want to go." Lily's voice, small and fierce and aimed at no one and everyone. The girl had planted herself beside Samuel like a fence post that refused to be pulled. Samuel looked at his father. Jesse looked at his father. 3 children and a quiet so heavy the cabin walls seemed to lean inward with the weight of it. Elias stood by the stove. His hands hung at his sides. Nora could see the war moving across his face like weather the part that built walls fighting the part that had just torn one down with a claw hammer. The man who ate standing up fighting the man who'd set a fifth plate. The terrified one and the one who'd carried a freezing girl inside without thinking. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The room's almost finished," he said, slowly, like each word cost him something he'd been saving for 2 years. "It needs curtains." A pause so long Nora could hear the fire cracking. "I don't know how to make curtains." Her hand dropped from the handle. She turned, looked at him. This man who couldn't say stay, but could say, "I need something I can't do alone." This man who'd opened his door for a dying girl in a blizzard and spent 11 days opening every other door in his life, one board at a time. "I know how to make curtains," she said. Lily crossed the room. She took the carved bird from her pocket. She'd been carrying it since the first night. The night Samuel placed it in her screaming hands and set it on the shelf next to the brass button. 2 small things from 2 gone parents, placed side by a 6-year-old who understood what the adults were still trying to learn. Jesse watched. His mouth opened. Old habit: guard the borders. Protect what's left. Don't let anyone new inside where they can do damage. Then he looked at the bird, his mother's bird, given freely by his brother to a stranger's daughter, and the girl had carried it gently for 11 days and was now putting it back where it belonged. He closed his mouth. He nodded. 3 weeks later, Elias Crane hauled firewood. Same sled, same trail across the Montana flats. Same cold, though softer now, the deep freeze loosening its grip. The air carrying something faint underneath the ice. Not warmth, not yet. A promise of warmth. The kind of smell that means February knows March is coming, even if it won't admit it. The cabin had changed. 2 windows instead of 1. He'd cut the second himself, and Nora had measured the frame so tight that not a breath of draft came through. Both windows had curtains now blue calico with tiny yellow flowers, sewn from the fabric she'd laid on the threshold of a room that used to be boarded shut and was now painted white with a bed Jesse helped him build from pine scraps. Through the glass, Jesse at the table, reading aloud from a book Nora had carried in her travel bag. He stumbled on the longer words, and she waited patient, steady, not correcting, just present until he worked them loose on his own. The boy who'd hidden for 2 years that he couldn't read had handed her that shame on the 3rd day after the blizzard cleared, and she'd taken it from him like it weighed nothing at all. Samuel and Lily sat on the floor beside the stove, building a corral from wood scraps. For the horses they were going to have someday. The brass button hung on a string around Lily's neck, the tiny anchor catching firelight when she moved. The carved bird Ruth's meadowlark sat on the shelf by the window where the morning light could find it, not clutched in a sleeping boy's fist anymore, not hidden, set out where it could be seen and remembered and honored. Elias stacked the wood against the cabin wall. He straightened, pressed his palms against the small of his back, and looked at the sky clear, wide, the kind of blue that only exists in Montana after a storm has spent itself completely. A hawk circled high and slow over the eastern ridge, hunting. He walked to the door, paused. Inside, someone laughed. He couldn't tell who. It didn't matter. Laughter in that cabin was still new enough to stop him every time. The way a man who's been thirsty a long while will stop and stare at water before he drinks. He opened the door. No bracing, no hesitation. Just opened it. The way you open a door to a place where the people inside are expecting you and the lamp is already lit. 5 plates on the table. His chair pulled up to the spot beside Nora's. She looked up from the book. She didn't smile. She shifted her chair half an inch to the left, making room that was already there. And the gesture was so small and so ordinary and so exactly right that it meant more than any words this cabin had ever held. Elias Crane sat down, for the first time since Ruth died. He sat at his own table and ate supper with his family. Not a family he was born into, or married into, or inherited from someone else's plan. A family the blizzard dropped at his door, one frozen girl at a time, and he chose to keep. Outside, snow fell gentle, just winter being winter. The smoke rose from the chimney in a straight line. The wind had finally quit. The cabin sat in the white landscape, 2 windows glowing gold. The door shut against the cold, but unlocked. Funny thing about a locked door, it keeps the weather out just fine, but it keeps everything else out too, and a man can spend 2 years not realizing the thing he's protecting himself from is the only thing that could save him.